All right. Hi, everybody. We're back. Same day. It's our CFB Talk 64. We're going to be talking about HBCU football with the founder of HBCU Gameday, Stephen J. Gaither. He's going to be joining us in a moment. And we want to hear from you as well. This is going to be a great opportunity. Stephen's been fine about that. He wants to listen to you as well. I know there's a lot of passionate fans, not only of historically black college and university football, but also just HBCU Gameday. It's a great site. We've been fans of it for a couple of years now. Actually, more than that. I mean, a couple of years ago, it was the beginning of the pandemic at this point. Like we've been fans for a while. So I see he's here. I'm going to invite him up, and we're going to have a nice chat. So I can see he's up here. Steven, are you with us?
Hey, yes, I am. How you doing tonight?
We're doing good. How are you?
Doing great, doing great. No complaints. It's game week. It's hectic. It's getting back to the grind. So, happy to be here.
I'm glad you were able to take some time to speak with us. I mean, this is something I've really wanted to host, to have you on, and just to talk about things, because I love the site. I mean, I remember when I first noticed it on Twitter, and then I went to the site itself, and you guys do so much great work. For those who aren't familiar with it, what is the site HBCU Gameday?
Yeah, so, well, first off, thanks for the kind words. So, HBCUGameday.com started it back in 2012. And so it's 10 years this year. And I guess if you take away the 2020 football season, which we didn't really have, and you don't count the spring 2021 season, this is kind of our 10th year of coverage of HBCUs. So, again, just a place where folks can find out about what's going on at HBCU sports. HBCU sports in general, but basketball, football mainly, and basketball as well take up the majority of our time. So we're a collection of journalists, also different storytellers as well, that come together and just kind of make sure that we keep up to date with what's going on with the HBCU sports across all levels, not only the MEAC and the SWAC, but also in the Division II ranks, the SIAC and the CIAA, as well as our NAIA and the folks that are kind of in different conferences now, as we've had some programs spread out. So, we're just a place where you can go and learn about HBCU sports and culture, what's going on. We also, in addition to focusing on what's going on, we try to give historical context and things like that, because a lot of folks, a lot of information isn't necessarily readily out there, or if it is, it's only surface level. And as much as we can, we like to dig a little bit deeper and try to give the full picture. So, long story short, I guess I'd say what that was, if that was short at all.
Well, I mean, what led you to start the website? Because, as you said, it started back in 2012. It's been here for a while. Gosh, yeah, it is. Hey, happy 10 years. Actually, it's 11 now. But what led you to start the site?
Yeah, well, I think for me, so I went to an HBCU. I went to Winston-Salem State University,
Rams.
and yeah, the Rams. And so, when I was there, I wanted to go to school and work for the four-letter network after I graduated. And so that was kind of my goal. And then, the recession happened and life happened. And, trying to figure out where I fit in this journalism spectrum, and really deciding I wanted to make an impact. Besides, instead of just chasing money, because for most folks, chasing money in journalism is pretty futile. So I just kind of wanted to pursue passion. When I was at school at Winston-Salem State, we had a beat writer at the local newspaper, John Dell, who's still there. Actually, he's been, covering the same beat for 26 years now. That was just normal for us to have media there and to have him there and have coverage. But after I got out of school and just trying to keep up, with Winston-Salem State, I was able to do that, but not being able to really have an idea too much of the other schools that were in the league. The only places I could really go to get that type of information were places. There were a couple of online sites, Onadan, which was started by Eric Moore back in the 90s, which is, they have done, original reporting, kind of keeping everybody up to date to the news and notes. And so the nuts and bolts are there. And then they also have a fan forum where people can come in and share. And I just saw it was like one way. It was like a whole community of people that cared about HBCUs, not only their school, but also their conference and across that line. And I just felt like it was a little bit, the way that the information was gotten out there wasn't up to date and up to speed necessarily, because those entities didn't necessarily have the manpower or the access, or weren't ready with the technology for how sports content and sports news was being consumed. And so I just said, hey, still pretty young at the time. I was 26, going on 27. I had been, doing social media, since social media had been around. And so I just kind of figured I would, use my reporting skills, being in North Carolina, and then using my experience with social media to mitigate the things that I didn't have. And so, just kind of went out and started going to games and writing about things that were going on nationally as well. And then, a couple years later, things will grow, and my partners, Tally Carr and then Wally Pitt, will come along as well, adding their expertise on the video side and just taking this to a whole nother level. And so, yeah, it was really just a matter of making sure that HBCUs had the same type of coverage, or as best we could, that the PWIs, predominantly white institutions, and specifically the Power Fives and the schools that you saw day in and day out on ESPN did. So that was kind of the genesis of it, and that's kind of still the North Star to this day, So that, if that wasn't too long of an answer.
I mean, it needed a long answer. I mean, you can, if you gave me a short one, it would have been kind of, especially for something as important as why you created the site, because I enjoy it. And I was going to say, you can tell just pulling in all the writers you have over the years, it shows in the content. I mean, today I was reading about how Florida A&M has selected their new QB, the guy from Hawaii, and obviously reading about all the other topics. I mean, that article I really enjoyed. Actually, I remember the one I read earlier this week was about Tuskegee College. You were interviewing the new, not you, but someone with your staff was interviewing the new AD about where they're going there and when football might be a part of that. But as that AD said, they're still building up. They're still creating all of that athletic program from scratch. I mean, it's fascinating stuff. Again, I hope those of you out there hearing me talk about it understand how much I enjoy HBCU Gameday, both the Twitter account, but especially the website where all of this reporting has been going on. Stephen, I just figured since you went to Winston-Salem State, I have a couple questions I actually wanted to ask about it. Because I remember I became familiar with the university, 15, 16 years ago when I was actually working with a researcher there. And I wasn't as familiar with it. So, I got curious. I looked it up, learned all about Clarence Big House Gaines. I mean, you can't learn anything about Winston-Salem State and not understand the legend that coached there in men's basketball and won the first HBCU to win an NCAA national championship at D2 in 67? Am I right on that? I think I am. All right. So, but anyway, and Stephen A. Smith played for him. That I remember. I learned that years ago. Stephen A. Smith played for Clarence Gaines back in the day. That to me, I thought was amazing in and of itself. But what else?
Yeah.
I mean, what would you say if you're telling somebody what makes it exciting to be a part of your school?
I think so, and I'm sorry, I was on mute. I was agreeing. Yes, you did have right. 1967, the first HBCU to win the NCAA title. But yeah, I think our school, we're kind of like, I would say amongst all HBCUs, we're kind of in the middle of the road. We're not the biggest schools, the biggest HBCU. There's a school down the road in Greensboro who is the largest HBCU, and they're only 30 minutes down the road, and there's a lot of them there. And I'm talking about North Carolina A&T, which is another great school. And so, and you have also your FAMUs, you've got your Jackson State, some of the bigger HBCUs as far as student bodies and sports followings as well. And then you've got, some of your smaller schools, private schools, divisions at the Division II level, and even at Division I. And we're kind of middle of the road. We've got, a decent sized student body, but I think just there is an energy there that and I'm sure everybody feels this way about their HBCUs, but I noticed about Winston-Salem State is just really from the time I walked onto campus back in 2004, it just felt like home. We call each other Ramily and things like that. And it's for real. Like, last week I had the privilege of participating in an event that goes on for the freshmen at Winston-Salem State. It's called Ramdition. And so it's basically a freshman orientation week where they bring the freshmen in a week early, and they go, they give them all this instruction and all this stuff that, they tell them all these things that they're not going to live by and forget as soon as they walk out. Well, at times in their college careers. But at the end of it, there's a pinning. It's called Lambs to Rams. And so they ask the alumni to come back and volunteer. And so what happens is all of the young ladies receive a necklace with WSSU on it. And then the young men receive a red tie. And then they go through the ceremony through our archways, and then they are no longer Lambs; they are officially Rams. And I got a chance to do that last week as an alumnus, to connect with the class of 2026, which is crazy because I remember when I came in 2004, and I was like, man, the class of 2008 seems so long away. So it gave a chance to reconnect, with the past, myself, with the future, which is them. And so I think just things like that are what make all HBCUs in general, but especially Winston-Salem State, really intimate, and it's something that we're passionate about. And sometimes the administration feels the brunt of that passion. When we love something, we love it, and when we hate something, we hate it. But you're always going to hear about us because we're very passionate about our university. So I go to a lot of great HBCUs and a lot of great traditions, but I would not want to be anything else other than a Ram.
That's awesome. And that tradition's really neat, I got to say. And on the football field, I remember that was actually one of the interesting stories last year was that they from tag off of Robert May. Is it Macy? I forgot. Is Massey?
Massey,
But
Robert
yeah, but
Massey.
after 2 seasons as interim coach, I don't think I'd ever seen that before, where a guy served 2 full seasons as an interim head coach before they decided to move one way or the other. Why do you think that happened?
Yeah, well, I think I turned it the longest interim job ever, and if you so to go back in 2019, there was a parting of ways with the previous head coach. He was let go, and Coach Massey stepped in as the head coach of the program, and he was a defensive coordinator at the time, and he stayed at his defensive coordinator salary while the legal battle was going on, and as with a lot of HBCUs, the financial resources and implications are weigh heavily into decisions. And Coach Massey kept his salary for, I guess it was 2 years, his coordinator salary, while they were figuring out what they were going to have to do court wise. And Winston-Salem State doesn't have the money to pay. I guess they didn't feel like they had the money to pay to have two coaches, be paying two head coaches potentially. So he carried the water for the program in 2019. 2020, there was no CIAA football, and in 2021, again, as the money issues were being worked out, he again served as the head coach, and it was two rough seasons, back to back losing seasons, and prior to the 2019 season, WSU had gone, I believe, they had gone 10 years without a losing record, which was the longest point in HBCU at that point. And so, folks obviously want to win. They're not happy about the losses, and it's definitely been. It was definitely a point. It was definitely a point of contention, but I think at this point, hey, they've made their decision where who's going to be. The interim tag is moved off. They're going to sell it that they're trying to that now that the interim tag is being moved off, they're going to have more flexibility and more reach. We shall see, but the proof's going to be in the pudding. They start off at the season this year in Canton, Ohio, at the Hall of Fame game against Central State, which is another HBCU with a proud tradition. NAIA champs twice with Billy Joe back in the '90s, and they've had a downturn as well. So, now it's time for folks to put up or shut up. We don't have any more the interim tags off, and so everybody's you are what your record is at this point.
I know it's funny you mentioned that. I know, for example, at NAIA, Tennessee State, I think they had won at least one hoops championship when they were in that. I remember back when I toured NAIA headquarters. It's in Kansas City now, but they moved around a bunch. But I remember they still had the ball and all that stuff from when Tennessee State became, and that was a big deal because I think it was also part of it. The NAIA would let HBCUs into the tournament at a time when that wasn't, I think, as available.
Right.
And I believe it predated Winston-Salem State winning the NCAA D2 title in '67, but I'm a little rusty on that.
So they won back in the late '50s. They won the NAIA title. So a lot of times, folks will say that Winston-Salem State is the first HBCU to win a national championship, and I always make sure I correct them on that because yes, Tennessee State did win the NAIA title 3 years in a row under the legendary coach John McClendon, who really taught Big House Gaines a lot, who was also instrumental in HBCU basketball and HBCU sports in general when he was at North Carolina Central and then also at Tennessee State. So yeah, but you're right. The NAIA was the first national body to open up to HBCUs. Back in the 50s when they started to do it football and basketball, because I believe Tennessee State Tennessee State and possibly Grambling competed in the NAIA in football as well. So yeah, the NAIA was definitely the first to open the door for HBCUs, and obviously the teams at Tennessee State were amazing. And I think they were just inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame, the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame, which is amazing. And yeah, it's just an amazing legacy of HBCUs. How matriculated and the doors being closed, which forced us to make ways and to build our own traditions, which a lot of which carry on to this day. So just amazing the history and the interconnectedness of HBCUs, and that's one thing that we try to always make sure that we do. No matter whether teams switch conferences or go to different divisions, there's always that interconnectivity there on some level, especially if you dig back far enough in history. So yeah, shout out to Tennessee State for everything that they've done and what they're going to be doing going forward.
Well, I know we've been talking an awful lot about Winston-Salem State now Tennessee State, but I think part of the interest also, and what I think more fans, especially general fans, are familiar with are the teams at the FBS level. So I wanted to ask just a couple questions there, and also we will get this to anyone who wants to guest. I see you, Thack. I know you were on last night. We'd love to have you back. Would just be patient for a sec. And then anyone else, if you want to talk, just hit a request, and we'll try to get to as many callers as we can towards the end. But what I wanted to ask, there's been a lot of moves at the FCS level. I think, and we've talked about them again. The big guy down the street from Winston-Salem State, NC A&T, they're North Carolina A&T. They were the first to kind of start this, at least in my mind, moving to the Big South and now moving to the Colonial Athletic, and Hampton too, I should say. How are we going to see a crisis for at least one of the two traditional conferences for HBCUs? I think the SWAC seems to be healthy, but are we going to see some stress with this move for some teams out of the traditional HBCU conferences?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you look at it, obviously Tennessee State has been in the Ohio Valley Conference for 35 years or so. So they've kind of always been an outlier, and then everybody else on the Division I level was MEAC or SWAC. And you talk about the movement of the MEAC again. I go back to my alma mater, Winston-Salem State, back in 2010. Decided to go back to Division II and rejoin the CIAA. They just weren't ready to make the move up to Division I, because had that move happened, the MEAC at that point would have planning on going to a 12-team league. Football-wise, would have been 2 divisions, would have helped on travel costs and things like that, and possibly got a championship game, and things might have really been different. But I think that was a situation where that's kind of a microcosm of what's kind of been one of the things that has made it particularly difficult for the MEAC, in that there are a lot of HBCUs on the East Coast. There are a lot of them that are just not ready. They're just not Division I programs, and they have in the CIAA country as well as the SIAC, and so they have the programs can kind of be few and far between. I mean, if you look at the MEAC, right, before A&T left, it was only North Carolina Central and North Carolina A&T in the conference as MEAC teams. That was their only in-state game, right? If you Division II level where you have the CIAA, there are seven.
A
There's
ton,
seven.
yeah.
Yeah, seven. There's 7 schools, right? So that helps you keep your costs down, right? That also, that it's more cost effective. And if you're a bigger school, you may be able to absorb the cost. Again, North Carolina A&T is the biggest HBCU, and it has been for the last half decade or so. North Carolina Central isn't quite as big, isn't up there with that. So it's definitely but there's so many schools that are in between that. If you look at schools like Fayetteville State, Virginia State University, even Bowie State as well, that are in the footprint of the MEAC, and maybe they could but they have not decided to make the jump to Division 1 for cost and for a host of reasons, mainly cost. And because of that, it makes it tougher on the teams that are Division 1, because you have to, when you're keeping it, especially specifically to HBCUs, you're having to go further between, right? I mean, you've got a cluster of schools in Maryland, but they're having to go, previously they were having to go to Florida. They were having to go to Georgia when Savannah State was there. And so that was really kind of a microcosm of what's part of what's been going on with the MEAC. Savannah State, again, they languished in Division 1 purgatory for about 11 years before they joined the MEAC, became a MEAC member, but eventually they decided that they would go back to Division 2, and now they're in the SIAC as well. So that's another program that left even before those that you were mentioning, because the Division 1 just wasn't for them, right? Then you get to Hampton, and Hampton was a situation where they came up and they really started the ball rolling for the MEAC in the 90s as far as expansion, because they came along and then Norfolk State came along on their heels. And then a decade later, you had North Carolina Central and Winston-Salem State attempt to come up. And of course, North Carolina Central is still there. So, when they decided to go to the Big South, not be, so they're leaving the MEAC not for because they can't afford to be Division 1, but they saw something. They decided that they wanted to go to another FCS conference, and that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. That really got a lot of people upset. Some of the most vocal people were North Carolina A&T fans, supporters, what have you. And lo and behold, 2 years later, they decided to make the same move. They touted that they were looking to make though, again, when we were talking about the cost of being Division 1 and not enough HBCUs being Division 1, they talked about the travel costs, and so that's how they kind of tried to sell them moving to the Big South. So you had that, then you had North Carolina A&T as well, and then you have FAMU and Bethune-Cookman as well, deciding that after years of being in the middle and going up north, taking long trips up north, they decided they would rather take them out west. So all of those have created an atmosphere where the MEAC has lost a lot of teams in a short amount of time, and that can make it tough because I think obviously the teams that are still there want to be there, and truth be told, the programs that aren't there, a lot of people still want them to be there as well. But it is a situation where at the end of the day, the schools are individuals, and so they're gonna have there's been a little bit of a splintering, and everybody does have to look out for themselves, right? I mean, everybody has to, at the end of the day, they are going to have to give an account to whoever their stakeholders are for their individual institution. And so I think, for the schools that are there, it's important that they at least all have a backup or a plan B, because Delaware State and Howard have, at least flirted with other leagues. And at this point, there's a 6-team conference for football, 18 for basketball. And so it's I think everybody just has to be smart and be prudent and have a plan B, which can lead to a lot of uneasiness. And so obviously earlier this year, the CAA was heavily on Howard's trail, and we reported that they were close to preparing to make that move. And
I
for whatever
remember.
reason, they decided that they would stick with the MEAC, and the reasoning that we've heard is because they didn't want to be the team that collapsed the MEAC and really put the nail in the coffin for the league. And so, I think, when you have a situation where the schools can look at themselves and say, hey, you know what, we really feel it. The more that they can have schools feel that they are a part of something bigger than themselves, and that they are willing to, maybe make some small sacrifices in the short term to keep something together that they all believe in. I think that's definitely helpful for them. Commissioner Sonia Seals has, been there not quite a year actually. She just officially started in January. So she's been working feverishly to try to figure out, how to make everybody more comfortable. I think it really is just a matter of making everybody more comfortable, getting everybody feeling confident that things are growing. There's always the push for expansion and the desire for expansion. And I know that, the schools in the CIAA, some of them that I mentioned, Virginia States and things like that, they have been reached out to. At this point, they are, members of the CIAA, and they're longstanding members of the CIAA. And Division 1, again, it's making that move up to Division One is a huge move. And again, with the transformation committee and all the things that are going on, I think a lot of people are waiting to see if it's going to be any easier. And then that entrance fee, that entrance fee doesn't necessarily help as well. So, and you got to keep it going. So there are a lot of things that go on. People always want to play matchmaker and say, well, this team needs to leave this league so this league can thrive and survive. But every individual school is looking at their own situation, what their costs are, and the risk reward that I think a lot of people online don't necessarily have the proper vision of what it is. So
it's fascinating to hear all of this, especially what we're seeing even at the, you could say the two super conference league that we're seeing, that money is making people break longtime traditions. Obviously, with USC and UCLA bolting from the Pac-12, which they've been basically more or less the initial members since the predecessor was created. But money
right.
talks, and it's interesting though. I really was intrigued by how you phrased it about Howard, which of course makes sense. I mean, Howard is very prestigious academically. It is the Washington. I mean, there's more than one in Washington, but it's in Washington. It's a premier HBCU, and the idea that they would be the one to kill a conference I could see how that would rest heavily on their shoulders. But at the same time, to me, it's an interesting juxtaposition, because I remember when Savannah State tried and failed and decided to move down to D2, and I remember that kind of half-baked abortive attempt that Florida A&M had trying to be an FBS school, and I don't think a lot of people even noticed they tried that before returning back. So those were kind of the moves that I had remembered watching HBCUs do, and then suddenly there's like a different trend with Hampton, with what's going on with North Carolina A&T, and this idea that suddenly HBCUs are actually trying to get more of the pie, rather than sitting with the status quo. Now, whether there's a benefit to that or not, I don't know. There's a lot of, as you really thoroughly went through a lot of those questions. I part of it, the impetus, at least somewhat, has been how schools view the Celebration Bowl as a topic kind of related to all of this. Where do you think the celebration sits right now? I mean, is it, especially with what's going on with MEAC, is that something that could shake the very foundation of that? And has it been good for HBCU football?
It's interesting. So again, having been around since pre-Celebration Bowl era, I do remember when it was initially announced. I know that on the MEAC side in general, and I'm talking about the fan perception specifically more than anything, and to a certain extent, institution-wise, it was met with a lukewarm reaction at best. They were, again, the SWAC had decided back in the 90s that they were kind of through with the FCS playoffs and decided to do their own thing. And we got an article about that and their decision to do that back in 1999. But the MEAC, they had some wins, had a little bit more success than the SWAC in the playoffs historically. Florida A&M won the first FCS Division I AA championship back in the 70s. It actually wasn't a MEAC member at that point. It actually was an independent school because it was actually in the SIAC before it transitioned over to D1 fully, which is another fascinating story. But so they had some wins in the late 90s. South Carolina State had some wins in the 80s. North Carolina A&T as well had some wins. And so they had prided themselves on being competitive in the larger FCS community. And I would say that in my experience and in my observations, I think there's a little bit different of a mentality. I don't want to be blanket, but I think there's been historically a little different of a mentality in the East Coast HBCUs, the CIAA and the MEAC versus the SWAC and the SIC. And I think, like so many things that we deal with athletically come from historical context, and it comes from dealing with the history of racism. And on the East Coast, the further you go up, it's a little bit more veiled. It's a little bit more less resistance in your face. It's more of kind of like of a passive thing. And so I think that, they felt like, and I think in the Deep South, there is more of the, hey, no, this is where the lines are, and we're not even going to dance around it. Like, this is where the lines are. And I think that leads to a different philosophy on everything in a lot of ways, and just in intricate things. So I think the SWAC had already decided that they weren't going to be that they the larger FCS culture wasn't going to welcome them, or they weren't going to be able to succeed in the structure the way that it was built. And so they decided they wanted to build their own infrastructure. And I think in the MEAC and on the East Coast, there was that urge to, there was that urge to maybe, hey, there's a little veil of, hey, you know what, you guys can compete with us. And I think a lot of people like that. A lot of people liked being able to go beyond just being the best in HBCUs. They wanted to shoot for that FCS. And I'm not saying that, everybody wants to win as big as they can, but I think it was a little bit. I think it took the MEAC a little bit longer to acquiesce to the idea that, okay, you know what, we're not necessarily going to send our best to the greater championship, the greater pool. We're going to send it to and something that's going to be HBCU specific. And I think there was a little bit of resistance to that initially, but I think once the Celebration Bowl came out and folks got a chance to go, I've been blessed to go to all of them. I think folks started to understand the significance of the Celebration Bowl platform that it brings and the opportunity that it brings. And I think they have definitely embraced that more on the MEAC side than they previously had. And of course, you still have some folks who feel like ultimately they're doing the schools a disservice not to be competing within the greater FCS competition. But I think, in general, I think it's become something that, a lot of people are proud of. I would say more so now than when the idea was first put out there. And so, it does provide the visibility that HBCUs often don't get to see or haven't often gotten to see, as far as a nationally televised game on on ABC. And so that provides a level of prestige and a bowl experience that I think that every program that has gone through it has enjoyed it. And I think it's building as a destination, an event, and a big thing in the HBCU community and beyond. So obviously the eyeballs of the nation were on it, particularly this year with Coach Prime and his team being up there. And South Carolina State, a school that, was being threatened with being shut down not, half a decade ago, with some things that were going on within the state of South Carolina, was talking about shutting it down or putting it off. They got a chance to show up on the national stage. They got a chance to, play the spoiler and to really put themselves on the map to an audience that maybe had never seen a South Carolina State game. And I know Coach Buddy Pugh, who's the longest running coach in the MEAC and in HBCU football, and I'm guessing he's probably one of the longest running now in FCS, who's been there for 20 years. He talked about even he didn't really understand the scope of what of the eyeballs that the Celebration Bowl gets, the prestige that gets, and how it's altering. And the thing about it, you're talking about the MEAC and the playoffs and everything like that. And every year what would happen was you would get to you'd have all this energy about HBCUs football from the start of the season, the MEAC SWAC Challenge and all the classics, and then you go through homecoming season, and then everybody has their respective championship races, and then the SWAC will have their championship game in early December, and the SWAC champion wins the SWAC championship, which is great. But that's kind of the end of it for them. And then for the MEAC, the MEAC champion gets to go out and say that they're the MEAC champion, or a lot of times co-champion. And the last year that they didn't go to Celebration Bowl, hell, almost everybody won a championship. I'm kidding. It was 5 champions.
I remember that year. That was
so
spectacular.
yeah. It was like watching a car wreck, and nobody dies, but like everybody gets bumped up.
Like the AC Coastal. I just want to take a second to do a quick station ID, so to speak. You're listening to our CFB Talk 64. We've got Stephen J. Gaither. He's the founder of HBCU Gameday, the premier HBCU site for a lot of interesting insight on all aspects of it, but especially football and basketball. So we do recommend that. Also, we want to let up a couple people. Anyone, if you want to have a comment, question, whatever, hit request. We'll get to you. In fact, now Zach, you've been super patient. I'm going to just add you as a speaker. I'd love to hear your thoughts because this is such a broad topic. I mean, when I was planning this, I'm like, my goodness, I could just pick one topic. I mean, we just started talking about Winston-Salem State, and I know I could have easily filled an hour talking with you just about Winston-Salem State. But I
Oh
want
yeah.
to see, yeah, I mean, it's fun. I love it. So, but Zach, you've been patient. What's up? What did you want to ask?
Oh yeah, hey Stephen. Hey, thanks for coming on, man. This has been super insightful. I'm a white dude, and I'm from Missouri, man. We only got two historically black colleges up here, and they're
Hmm.
both pretty small, Lincoln and Harris Stowe.
Hmm.
But man, I love all things football, and I got a chance last year to catch a couple of the HBCU games, and man, it was a good time. My thing I wanted to ask though, if you could touch on this a little bit, that would be crazy. The bands, I mean, the bands are insane. I had a buddy who went to a historically black college, and he was showing me videos of the band. And I read somewhere online actually that Louisiana State, they pretty much more or less stole the song Neck, that tradition from historically black college. But the bands are just insane, man. They play with like the most like ridiculous passion, and it's loud, and it's unlike anything I've ever heard of before. And I know this is not necessarily football, but man, that was something that just totally stood out to me when I was watching those games. My buddy was showing those videos. I don't know if you have any insight into that. I know I kind of got off topic, but man, that was wild.
Well, you can't not mention the band. I mean, I was actually wondering how long it was going to be until someone mentioned the band, only because I think for a lot of folks, I mean, growing up, that would be their initial familiarity with it. But Steven, I want to talk over you. Sorry, but I was like, oh wow, we're getting a band question immediately. But
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's definitely it definitely is a thing all its own. You know. You know. It's interesting now. Again, having done this for 10 years now, there's so many pockets of HBCUdom, and the band heads have their own special. They're their own special cult within HBCU sports and culture. So, man, the band, football fans, they might go at each other's necks, about their football programs. But look, the one guy you don't want to get into an argument with is a band head because it can get real ugly real quick. We all love our bands and everybody loves their individual bands. But there obviously no two bands are alike. Although some like to sound like others. I'm not going to throw any names out there because I don't want any of that smoke. But I heard one of my friends say that a certain band or two bands sounded like cat sex. And, it was, yeah, so that's the type of thing the type of commentary that you can get from the band heads. And so it's really, again, it's its own culture, its own genre. I know a couple years ago, shout out to my guy, Gerald Huggins, he did a story where he, you talk about Neck. So Neck is actually, the foundation of Neck is from a song called of Cameo, the funk group Cameo, which most people know Candy or Word Up.
Yeah, man, great band.
Yeah, yeah. So 1984, they dropped a song called "Talking Out the Side of Your Neck," which is really actually a social commentary about politics era, that's actually what it's about. And so, but it has a bass line that's amazing, and just like most Cameo songs do. And so, the song comes out, and again, at this time, there's no Twitter, there's no YouTube, there's very little HBCU football is even on TV, but obviously bands had been a thing way before this. So this song comes out, and obviously everybody, again, in different parts of the country are hearing it at different times. And so, but again, people who have an ear for band and are band heads or band directors, they hear it and they just say, hey, this is a song that we should play. So, we did a story again, about how that song became what it was or what it is. Again, this is a song that's now 30, almost 40 years old, and it's still being played every week. The bass line from it, and it's the modified version of it, is being played every week. And so, depending on where you're from and where you heard it first and how old you are, will determine on who played it first. Some people on the East Coast will tell you that it was Norfolk State University, Spartan Legion. Out west in the SWAC, they'll tell you that it was Texas Southern, the Marching Storm. And so it's just great banter. Who was actually first? I think somebody pulled out a video, but I who knows? But it's like a urban legend, and it's fun to talk about it. And at one point for a while, it was one of our most read stories. So the bands are something that's inescapable. You can't get away from it. It's definitely it's one of the things that make HBCU football the brand that it is. And I know a lot of times folks who play the football and who are fans of the football sometimes are a little bit agitated or hesitant or reluctant to focus so much of the time and energy on the bands itself. But I think, again, it is something that makes the brand of HBCU football different. It does add its own flavor, and something that's definitely not going away anytime. So it's something that draws people in, and you hope that it draws them in so they can come to the game so that they can support the institutions and do it. But now that we have YouTube and everybody can see it, it's a whole different animal as well. So the bands are always there, loud and proud.
Yeah, hey, thanks, man. I appreciate the insight. This was fascinating for me, man. I was able to catch, I said, a couple games last year, man, and my buddy introduced me to sort of this world. He went, oh, shoot, I can't remember. I think Brown, maybe? Does that make sense? No. I can't remember.
In the Ivy League,
Morehouse. No, he went to Morehouse.
That's right.
And he introduced me, man, and it's been really cool, man, because I love watching all types of football and all different little worlds of football. And it's sorry to get you off track about the band stuff, man, but I had to ask it. I appreciate it, man. Have a good one.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. And by the way, if any of you want to chime in, just hit request. We'll try and get to you. But Stephen, it's interesting to me, and I don't know if you've seen this trend, but we've seen two programs in the next 2 seasons, two FBS programs. Now, I went to the University of Southern California, and it up until this year, there were only 3 schools left in FBS that had never, ever played an FCS program. And it was USC, and coincidentally, its 2 main rivals, UCLA and Notre Dame. And now, this year, UCLA is hosting Alabama State, and that's going to break their streak, in addition to being the first HBCU host. But I think it's much bigger than that. This is their first time they've ever played someone who isn't an FBS team. And then next season, Notre Dame's going to host Tennessee State. And again, that's going to be the first FCS program, let alone HBCU, that Notre Dame has ever hosted. So it seems to be a trend towards, HBCUs kind of becoming a part, not only of the college football culture, they always have been, but becoming high profile teams that are worth, making what almost seismic shifts to what programs have been doing before. Am I wrong in thinking that, or is that something you've noticed trending up?
Yeah, well, I think it's a number of things. A couple of years back, I think back to what was it, 2013, 2014, where Ohio State played Florida A&M, and I believe, obviously they played FCS schools before, but that was the first HBCU they played, and they paid them a handsome sum for that game. They got all their money's worth in the points section back, but so that's there have been teams that's always been there, and again, I mean, when we talk about the bands. Again, a lot of people, don't like to steer into that conversation, but it is something that they have that other other programs, specifically FCS programs, don't have. And I think it is really interesting that you're seeing programs, like you say, that have never played FCS schools before, seeing them playing an HBCU, because, an HBCU at this point, folks know that, that comes along with, the band, with the culture, and that also gives them a chance to engage some of these predominantly white institutions or larger institutions. It gives them a chance to engage their Black, alumni base. This week, I'm going to be in Atlanta, but we're going to have several members of our crew over in down the road in Chapel Hill, where they're going to be playing Florida A&M. It's a big event for the Black alumni there, where they get to, come back and they're going to do a lot of events and programming around it. And so I think, when you're looking at UCLA, you're also seeing more, when you're looking at diversity and Black and inclusion and Black and brown faces in athletic administration at these schools, and they have a voice. I believe one of the folks at UCLA in administration, and I don't want to say it's the AD, but someone that's high up, he had a connection. He's from North Carolina. He had a connection to North Carolina Central, who's also going to be playing UCLA next year. And so, they were able to work that out. And then obviously Notre Dame scheduling a Tennessee State program that has a storied history as well. And it doesn't hurt that they have Eddie George, former Heisman Trophy winner, and they're a brand that is ascending and rising back and trying to get back to becoming one of the premier HBCUs and FCS schools. And I think, it's definitely been a greater awareness. There have been a lot of things that have come down the pipeline in terms of business, because business is really what this is too, as much as anything else, that have come down the line for HBCUs that, a decade ago we wouldn't have seen. 5 years ago we wouldn't have seen. And so I think, every HBCU needs to, be prudent in making sure that they seek out those opportunities, capitalize on them when they make sense for them, and really use them to build their brand. I mean, for Alabama State or North Carolina Central to go out to the West Coast, not only is that a chance for them to go out and get a check and get a guaranteed game, and also get their players an experience of playing in those type of fields and arenas, but it's also a chance for them to get to a part of the country where there are no HBCUs. There are HBCU alumni though, and what you'll see there's so many people that will come to a game like that. Whatever people will travel with the team, but also the folks that are the Black alumni of the particular school, and then also maybe just HBCU supporters who may have gone to, they may have gone to Grambling or they may have gone to Southern, and they don't get a chance to really see or feel that HBCU vibe, and they'll get a chance, and they're out on the West Coast. They can, if they're in LA, they can go and support Alabama State and get a little bit of that as well. So I think everybody, HBCUs are hot now. HBCUs are more, the mainstream is more willing to embrace them and to be tied to them, because they are such a symbol of Black progress and, what Black folks have meant to this country. So I think it's pretty cool that they're getting a chance to do that, getting some good guarantees, which, pretty much all FCS and D2 schools do play guaranteed games anyway. And so I think it's just a great opportunity for them on the business side for sure.
I have to, speaking of, the ascendancy of HBCU football, I would be remiss if I didn't ask your thoughts on the impact Deion Sanders has had on the entire culture and the business, every level of it.
Yeah, well, look, he's certainly been good for my pockets. I'm not gonna sit here and lie to you. You know what I mean? It's, Deion Sanders, and we've had pro football, we've had pro HBCUs for years. I mean, it's usually guys who are alumni of those programs or alumni of HBCUs that decide they want to get into coaching, and this is how they've done that. Ken Riley, who should be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, who got one step closer recently in Canton. After he finished his standout career with the Cincinnati Bengals, he went back to Florida A&M, his alma mater, and did some great things there. And then there's been guys like Billy Joe, who went to Villanova back in the 60s and turned into powerhouse programs at Central State and FAMU. There has been Pete Richardson, who, played in the NFL in the 70s and then got his start in college at Winston-Salem State University, led them to a couple of championships, and then went over to Southern and really cemented his legacy as well. So, we've always had pro athletes, former pro athletes as head football coaches, but obviously Deion Sanders is one of them. Count that stint that he had with the Ravens back in 2005. It's been 15 years. It's been, over 15 years since he's played. A lot of the guys that he's recruiting now the guys he's recruiting now never saw him play. They never saw prime time. They just know the guy from the TV show. They know the guy who's on social media, the guy who is connected to everybody, and the guy that, is not afraid to, who has never been afraid of promoting himself. And now he's not afraid to promote the young men coming into his program. And so, he has definitely it's been a game changer, no doubt. I mean, he brings in a set of eyeballs that I don't think anybody else in football culture really could have brought into Jackson State for sure, but also to the SWAC and to HBCUs at large. And so, it's definitely been one of those things like, we didn't necessarily see coming. 2 years ago, he started talking about the HBCU combine, and it was like, okay, that's cool. Deion's, doing something for the HBCUs. That's cool. And then he, in that August, he came out as a graduate of Talladega College, who we were talking about earlier, who doesn't even have a football program, but he, immersed himself there because he didn't get his degree at Florida State. And then lo and behold, he becomes a head coach at Jackson State. And so it's been a seismic shift, and it's really energized everything. They've given HBCUs a team that you either love or hate for a lot of people. And I don't think, and not just the traditional people that you hate them because they beat your team. Like some people just hate them because they're getting more attention than their team. They are, yeah. And then some people who maybe necessarily didn't care about HBCU football before have definitely decided that, this is something that they want to do. There's been a proliferation of, folks who, are now covering the SWAC or commentating on the SWAC or HBCU football. That's been that outgrowth as well. There's just been a whole seismic shift that he has caused. That he's had success last season. We'll see what happens this year, but him just being who he is, having the connections that he has, and just always being out there and consistently being out there has definitely been a game changer. And it's one thing that I don't think anybody had on the chessboard, and I think you would ask even himself 5 years ago, but it's been just a major bit of light to come to the HBCU spectrum for sure.
Do you think the success, or at least the splash, I mean, the splash is almost as big as the success on the field, and you could argue they're the same thing. Do you think that's part of what led Eddie George and Hugh Jackson to also now join the HBCU coaching ranks? Because I think both of those were like, wow, Eddie George is now going to be at Tennessee State. Hugh Jackson, wow, Hugh Jackson's going to be coaching Grambling. Is that to extent the Deion effect?
I would say a little bit. If you listen to Eddie George's introductory press conference back in the spring of 2021, he talked about how he never saw himself as a coach. And, Coach Prime, Deion Sanders, he's been coaching at some level since he's had kids, right? He's been coaching Shador and Shiloh and even Deion's Jr. He's been coaching his kids for years. He's had the Prime prep and then went over to Trinity as well, coaching there. So him being a coach was something that we could have probably foreseen happening, but Eddie George didn't see himself becoming a coach 6 months before he became the head coach of one of the HBCUs and FCS programs with one of the best traditions ever. So I think there's a little bit of that, but I think it's just a matter of more so of HBCU administrators being willing to go outside of the box with. I think we all again have to recognize there's only one Deion Sanders, right? And so not everybody's going to be able to come in and get you that type of publicity, that type of support. Eddie George didn't have Diddy on the BET Awards, yelling about he was going to, promote his program, So Deion Sanders is one of one. But I think, it provides another option for HBCUs. I think, HBCUs have always had great coaches that cared about the young men that they were entrusted to them, about building them. And obviously this goes back not only to Jake Gaither and Eddie Robinson and those guys, but also, back to, Coach Hill over at Morgan State, who, went 54 games without a loss, and so many great coaches that have gone through the HBCU spectrum throughout the years. They've been great coaches. They've been great doing recruiting with what they had, turning a little into a lot. But, the resources have always been the thing that HBCUs have lacked. So, now it looks like more HBCUs are going to a CEO type of head coach approach. We also have, I think one interesting one we're going to see this week, which is Eddie Robinson, who is an HBCU alumnus. He is head coach at Alabama State, which is his alma mater, but he's never coached before either. He's kind of in that same boat as well, but he's been a successful businessman. He's made connections. And now, he's coming in to run his alma mater's football program and see if he can't get them to the next level. And so I think, his hiring maybe made some administrators look at how they're hiring coaches in a different way than just, hiring, I think they're realizing that the resources have to be there, and maybe they feel like they need a coach who can help them get resources just as much as they need a coach that can help them do X's and O's. So,
Stephen, I know we've been on for an hour. I just want to say, if you can stay, I'm happy to keep asking questions, but I know you're busy. I know you work. If you want to stay on, we'd love to keep talking to you.
Oh, I'm good. Yeah, go ahead. Fire away.
Awesome. Yeah, no. And by the way, Trey, I see you. I'm going to go ahead and add you as a speaker, and we'll get you in a second. But, I'm glad you brought up Alabama State, because I was wanting to ask about Eddie Robinson, because that was an interesting coaching situation as well. I mean, they're in the MEAC SWAC Challenge, as I recall, to open the season, aren't they?
Yep.
That's been a little bit
Mm-hmm.
uneven, hasn't it? I mean, the SWAC has a lot to prove, despite the issues with MEAC stability. The SWAC, I mean, it seems like I mean, it's stacked. I don't know the exact record, but it's stacked towards the MEAC at this point, isn't it?
Yeah, I believe it's 11-4, 11-4, 12-4.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, definitely the MEAC has had the upper hand on that, as well as the Celebration Bowl. I did talk to a coach who's coached in both leagues, asking him why that success has been there for the MEAC games in particular. Because if you take away those games and you talk about just in-season showdowns, it's a lot closer. Even last year's champion MEAC SWAC winner, North Carolina Central, they were able to beat an Alcorn State team at the beginning of the year, but then they lost to a Mississippi Valley program that has struggled heavily
Yeah.
in the same year. So it's definitely one of those things. And one of the things that he told me, that this coach told me, that usually, and he's coached in both leagues, he told me that usually SWAC is more of an offensive league, the MEAC more of a defensive league, and usually in the first week of the season, defenses are ahead of offenses, right, for most schools. And so that was one reason he felt the MEAC had success in that first game. And then obviously the MEAC champ usually has about a month off prior to SWAC champion. So, there is that. I mean, teams have overcome it. Grambling was able to beat North Carolina Central in the two Celebration Bowl, where our guy threw his helmet off. But that was the exception and not the rule. And so I think, for the SWAC, they have a proud history. They're in the same footprint as the SEC. And for people who aren't familiar with HBCU football, they're in pretty much the same footprint as the SEC now. Literally, well, they don't have Oklahoma, but from Florida to Texas, they're there, and so they care about they're passionate about their football programs. And they're not gonna like this, but I would say that they're the more passionate fan base. They talk about football they're plugged in on football 24/7. I don't care if it's like SWAC championship basketball night or afternoon. They're still talking about, in March, they're talking about who's going to win what game in football. So they have a proud history and tradition, and it definitely means a lot to them. I know they hate that they have become this, but they're gonna have to will off some wins in these games, because what do people remember every year? They remember the first and the last game of the season, how you started and how you finished. And they've been starting and finishing by, taking L's. So it's going to be interesting just talking about this. Eddie Robinson has never been a head coach. Obviously, his coaches that are his assistants have. So, but Howard and Coach Larry Scott, who, was a guy who coached at the Power 5 level, was an interim head coach at Florida for a second, and has come to Howard to try to build that program up. He has the task of preparing for a coach who has never coached a game. And so, you kind of have to see how things are going to shake out. So, yeah, it's definitely been tilted to the MEAC. And I think it's going to be interesting for sure to see how it works out this Saturday. But I will be in Atlanta along with the team, and I'm excited to see how this works out.
Absolutely. Hey, Trey, you've been really patient. What did you want to ask?
Hey, first of all, Stephen, I want to say thank you. This has been a very interesting topic, and I've enjoyed it. I've first learned about a lot of HBCUs when Coach Nolan Richardson in basketball for the University of Arkansas scheduled a bunch of HBCUs, and I got to see a lot of games growing up against Grambling, Jackson State, Delaware State, I think Bethune-Cookman. It's really interesting to see it. But I'll get on to my main question. Hopefully, it's not too much of an oddball question. In the Northeast, there's another league that doesn't play a bowl and it has its own kind of like ecosystem that I don't see. I don't see a lot of MEAC or SWAC teams play. Have any HBCUs played an Ivy League school? And has there ever been any discussion about some of those games being played or anything like that? So anyway, Stephen, thanks.
Yeah. No, thanks for the question, Trey. I really appreciate it. Yes, they have Howard suited Harvard a couple years ago.
Yeah, that was a big deal.
Yeah, it was a big deal, and they're going to play again this year as well. Howard is definitely hoping that this one goes a little bit better, because that was the year where they decided that they were going to hire Ron Prince, and that was that. And turned out to be a disastrous year. He only lasted a couple games before Some things came out about accusations about what he was accused of. That's the story that we broke. And, shortly thereafter, the investigation was open and he was shown the door. And so, that was and I'm pulling up Harvard put up 60 on Howard. Yeah, not the way that you wanted to do that. But so there is that game for sure. And they're going to play again this year. They're going to play in DC. It was 62-17 was the score. Not really a red letter date, but hey, there's a new year this year, and so yeah, you have seen that, and I wouldn't be surprised if you saw more of that. Again, the new commissioner for the MEAC, Ms. Sonia Stills, she likes to refer to the MEAC, which has rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Some people the wrong way, but a lot of people really like it, and that is the Elite Eight. And so when she says the Elite Eight, she's talking about the institutions more so than the football program. And so, and really trying to push the MEAC forward as a league of, excellent academics as well as athletics. And so I wouldn't be surprised going forward, especially with the MEAC right now being, contracted and only having 6 programs. There's a lot of space on there for a lot of different things scheduling, which I think is one good thing or one interesting thing that's come out of the MEAC having all these changes. And so, yeah, I definitely could see opening a door where there's some type of a challenge or, just a scheduling, maybe not necessarily a scheduling alliance, but, definitely where they say, hey, let's see how we can work together on both our brands and come together and collaborate on some things. So so they have played Ivy League school.
I just want to mention, Stephen, that also Howard is not only playing Harvard, the week before they're playing Yale.
Yale.
So they're at Yale, and then they host Harvard. So that's going to be really interesting.
Yeah. And Howard is definitely one that I would say is probably the most likely to do so. For those who aren't familiar with HBCUs, Howard, is in DC. It's funded by the federal government, I believe. And so it has some advantages, and it's, always been it's one of those schools that is heavy in academics. They don't have a lot of on-field success football program-wise. I think they have. They had
that crazy upset. I think that the one thing I think you can give them is they had the biggest upset, I think, in terms of any casino that was willing to even put a line on it. When they upset UNLV several years ago, that was the biggest upset in the history of football. I think when they actually looked at the spread.
Yeah, it was. And so I think, and that's a great point. It was such a huge deal. Cam Newton's younger brother, his first game. Definitely a point where, I think Howard definitely got into the minds of a lot of people, but I just wanted to paint the picture that they have been the school that is academics, and when they don't win, they can say they're an academic school. And they've always hung their hat on academics. And so playing Ivy League teams fits right with the profile of what they want to be and what they want to do. And so obviously they like to be more competitive, obviously they like to win. And so you see the 2 games they have this year. And they also, I think their scheduling this year, they might have had like one of the highest GPA schedules ever, because they also play Morehouse and Hampton as well as Yale and Harvard. And so they're playing some pretty smart teams, academics wise and everything like that as well. So yeah, I think you'll definitely see Howard continue to do that. Again, given the scheduling flexibility where, you only have 5 conference games. So now you can play an FBS school, then you can play a couple FCS schools. And then if there's a D2 program that's close to you that makes sense and you want to kind of, after you've recouped your money and you want to kind of beat up on somebody else, you can give them a little bit of that money and do that. It kind of backfired against Howard last year in a game against VUL. But, it's definitely an Ivy League and MEAC challenge. I think in a lot of ways makes a lot of sense. So maybe we'll see that someday.
I'd love to see that. That would be great. Hey, thanks for that question, Trey. Jake, you're up here. We'd love to hear that.
Perfect. Well, yeah, thank you guys for setting this up. And Stephen, thank you for doing this. You guys do great work, and I'm a big fan. Now, this might be a bit of a touchy subject or a controversial question, so I apologize in advance. But going back to Dion for a second, I've always just sort of been curious. Is there any thought that Dion's, I don't know if he still is, but affiliation with Barstool or anything like that sort of hurts what he's trying to do or maybe rubs some people the wrong way?
Yeah, I think it's something that initially when he came in, I think a lot of people were, especially, a lot of black folks for sure, were leery of with Barstool's reputation and the things that they've done, and the things they've got called to the carpet on, rightfully so, in a lot of cases, in most cases. But I think, it's a business deal for him, and he sees, he has seen the value in it for him. But it does. But I think, on my vantage point from where I sit, I look at what he's done with his internal media, our partners, the pregame show, where he gives them scoops. Like they were the first ones to have that Zimmer was going to be going to be an analyst and help Deion Sanders out. He gives them a lot of exclusives. He also makes it a point to talk to black media as well. And I think, black folks have always, to get ahead, we've always had to have some alliances with some folks that, maybe kind of made us a little bit shaky and a little bit, And so I think that, it's something that's easy to compartmentalize. And I don't think it's been quite the spectacle that a lot of people thought it was going to be initially coming in. So obviously, he had his reality show, and I haven't seen. I don't know what's going on with that at this point, but I mean, the bar definitely made folks definitely squirm, kind of uncomfortable a little bit. But I think at the end of the day, that what he's doing to put the spotlight on JSU and HBCUs as a whole definitely outweighs any feelings that folks have about Barstool, especially since that partnership hasn't been as prominent in a lot of ways as we thought it might be.
Got so many folks who've been now wanting to chime in, so I want to get them. Doc, you're next. We'd love to hear from you.
How everybody doing? I'm Doc Holliday with HBCU Overdrive with Doc Holliday. It's a daily YouTube show that I do. Just started up like a couple months ago in May. But Steven, I put in on Twitter, and I put in a thing saying that if Howard can at least put like 40% of their interest into the athletics as they do with academics, I don't see how they would be. I don't see why they won't be able to compete. They'll be able to compete for like the MEAC championship, or to get to the Celebration Bowl. What do you feel about some, like, that's what I said, kind of like what I said? Like, do you think that, is it true, or do you think they need to invest a little bit more?
Well, I'm sure. Well, thanks for the question. I'm sure that Coach Scott would love to have some more resources there for him. I think Howard in football is an interesting proposition. They're never going to make a ton of money off of it because their stadium is so small. They sit about 7,000 or 8,000, so they're never going to make a lot of money for football. At least generating revenue on that end. But truth be told, even when people talk about HBCUs and HBCU football, internally, in HBCUs, we know what their history is, and the shortcomings that they've had, but they're always in the conversation. And for me, it seems like for them, the main thing is just to make sure that they're top of the topic of conversation. So, it would be great. They did have some competitive teams in the 80s and 90s. I think it's always there for them. I think it's just a matter of if they see the value in winning the MEAC title. I think now with the Celebration Bowl, and that's kind of where I was going with the Celebration Bowl question earlier. Now with the Celebration Bowl gives you a end of the year something to spike the ball. The scoring the touchdown is winning the MEAC title, but when you got a chance to win the MEAC and your reward the playoff game on the road with only a handful of fans, and you're probably going to lose, it's not quite as sexy as getting to go to a bowl game against another HBCU in a big city and giving your athletes that experience and extending your brand. And so, I think for Howard, now, if they're ever going to do it, I would think that now would be the time that they're going to do it. While the MEAC is small, I think while the MEAC is small and while there is maybe a window open for them. So, I think it's just going to matter to, how the president feels about it. And of course, they're about to have a presidential change, pretty soon. Dr. Wayne K. Frederick is leaving out. Athletic director Kerry Davis is still there, and he's trying to do a lot of creative things. But it's going to be interesting to see what the new president is and what their philosophy is and how much value they put into putting the dollars into sports. Because as we saw last year, they have some major infrastructure issues that they have as well. People are always talking about the money that Howard gets and complaining about that, but they have a lot that they have to fill, figuratively and literally. So it's something that it would be great if they could do it, but we'll see what happens.
And also, I got one more question. Who do you feel is on the hot seat all around HBCU football, or just within between the MEAC and the SWAC?
Good question.
I don't know. So much has changed. So many people are in year 1 or 2. I mean, some people have said Delaware State coach Milstead, but I don't know that. I don't know that firing Coach Milstead would be the answer, even if things didn't go well this season. I think Delaware State has some issues. They got to have some come to Jesus meetings about what they're going to do with their football program anyway, as far as getting it out of the cellar in the MEAC. And we have so many new coaches. I don't know that there is necessarily a hot seat at this point. Some people might say Bethune-Cookman. Coach Sims has been there for a while, had some success early in the MEAC. Things have kind of leveled off, but again, the institution has had a lot of turmoil. We'll see what Reggie Theus wants to do. Obviously, he's a basketball guy, but he is also the AD. We see he moved the football game. He made the move that Coach Prime wasn't necessarily a fan of, moving the football game to Jacksonville. We'll see what his expectations are of Coach Sims. I think if they have another really bad season, it's going to be hard for him to keep his job. So he might have the hottest seat between him and the Texas Southern coach. But again, Texas Southern again is a program that a lot of this stuff is like you can change the coach, but a lot of the stuff is if your infrastructure is consistently bad and you've gone through all these coaches and you've never won or you haven't been winning, how much is a coaching change going to really impact things? So that's kind of where I see it.
Well, I'm about to say Doc Gamble for UAPB because I feel like when the game when they played Alcorn and they had the lead and they gave it away, I feel like that was the downfall for UAPB football at the time. And we talking about him coming off being SWAC West champs in the spring, but I feel like he's on. I think he's on the hot seat also.
Yeah, their AD seat has been a hot potato seat. So, I mean, again, they could fire him, and it might make some people happy. But should they? I don't know. It's probably deeper than that, but we'll see. It's going to be interesting.
Doc Holliday, thank you so much for joining us. Stephen, you got some time? We got a couple more people up here who I think would love to ask you some questions.
Sure, I can take a couple more questions.
All right, sounds good. Colby Brown Sr., you've been really patient. What's up?
What's going on, Stephen, man? I'm Coach Brown over here at Central State University. I coached in the MEAC for some time at South Carolina State last season. Mm-hmm. Just knowing the importance of MEAC football and, SWAC football for the HBCU culture. And now I'm at another HBCU, Division II, Central State University. And, our first game is on NFL Network versus your school, Winston-Salem State. I just want to know, what do you think about this game and, the importance of this game for the D2 HBCU? And, are you all going to be there to cover it? How do you see this game shifting the Division II HBCU spotlight? I know it's a lot of talk about the MEAC and the SWAC, FAMU, South Carolina State, Jackson State. But how do you see Division II HBCUs this season? And, what do you think about this first game being on NFL Network and the importance of, Division II HBCU football as well?
Yeah, great question, Kobe. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think it's definitely important that, for me, again, when I started this, it was HBCU Gameday, and my belief and my history, having gone to Winston-Salem State, especially when I did, and I'm sorry, Siri, I'm not talking to you, but going to Winston-Salem State when I did, I was able to see WSSU as a Division II school and then trying to make the transition to Division I. And so I wasn't necessarily locked into being just a conference guy. A lot of people it kind of goes into that, like I'm a MEAC guy, I'm a SWAC guy, I'm this, I'm that. For me, I think I see value in all of the HBCUs, and I think it's important that we cover it. A lot of people are upset now because so much of our Jackson State dominates so much of our coverage when, in fact, if you look at what we're doing versus what a lot of people that are in the space of HBCUs are doing, we're covering Livingstone, we're covering Johnson C. Smith, we're covering some of these Division II schools that, even even folks who have HBCU channels totally ignore. And I understand why they do that, but I think it's also important that these are some of the oldest HBCUs that we have are in Division II. Some of the HBCU football programs that are the oldest. We just did a story. Everybody check it out. The amazing Tom Skip Foreman, who just retired from the AP after 43 years, and he said his retirement goal was to come work for us at HBCU Gameday, which just blew my mind. He had a great story about Livingstone College's new blue turf and about, really what they're trying to do under head coach Sean Gilbert. They played the first HBCU football game 130 years ago against Johnson C. Smith. And, being a Winston-Salem State guy, I got to give all of those teams, some ribbons. So, I did say that was the only time that Johnson C. Smith's program was over 500 as a program when they won that game. But that's neither here nor there. D2 HBCUs matter just as much. And I'm glad that those two schools are in the Hall of Fame game, because both of those schools have made a contribution. Both of those schools have competed on the national level. Both of them have been to the D2 national championship game. Central State was back in the 80s, and then, of course, Winston-Salem State back in 2012. And I think it's going to be a great game. Two programs that are looking to get back into the spotlight, have fan bases that are very proud and like to win, love to win, crave winning, but they haven't had a lot of it lately. So I'm really excited about it. I will be there in person. I've never been to the Hall of Fame, so it'll be a great chance to go check the Hall of Fame. And I'm looking forward to the competition between the CIAA and the SIC, because on the low, the CIAA has definitely been, the CIAA in particular has probably been the most successful HBCU conference football-wise in competing nationally over the last decade or so, when they've had not only Winston-Salem State make their run, but also had Virginia State win multiple playoff games, and then you've also had Bowie State as of late become a national power as well. And I see, schools like Tuskegee. Forgive me, guys. Tuskegee, Morehouse, even though they've been down for quite a while, and you look at a program like Edward Waters and Allen, the excitement that they have around those programs as well. A lot of great things are going on in Division II football, and I'm glad that the Hall of Fame decided to give them a spotlight to shine along with FCS schools.
Great. One more question, man. For me being an HBCU coach for these past couple of years, I definitely see the hype and it's just a great experience, man. And the times have changed. And I know you've been around covering HBCU football for a while. And, like I said, just being a part of the culture, it's just been amazing. You can feel it. It's just a great feeling, But as far as this season, do you think this is the most hyped season, and will this be to you, the most watched season for HBCU football, like the most important season this season? Do you think?
I definitely think it has the capability of being it. When you talk about you talk about the new deals that the SWAC and the CIAA have announced with HBCU Go, Byron Allen's platform. We did a story a couple weeks ago how a update to last year, where last year there were more HBCU games than ever that you're able to view without actually having to go into the game on TV, streaming, and everything like that. This year, the number is even bigger. So the stage just continues to grow larger. A lot of us have said that maybe the best thing for HBCU football was for Jackson State to have the year that it had, get the spotlight that it had, but then lose in that championship game, because it opened up the eyes to the amount of talent that are at HBCUs. Today, the Senior Bowl watch list came out, and there were 14 players from HBCUs, which were almost half of the number of guys that were from the FCS and Division II ranks were HBCU talent. It's been proven that we have talent. What we haven't had is the infrastructure to really build our program's sustainability. And so I'm hoping that with these new TV deals, with the new energy around HBCU football, that will continue to go and grow for years to come. So I think at all levels, we're set up for a great year. And, I honestly can't wait to get started and get out there on the field.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it, man. I will see you out there September 4th. I'm going to come up to you, introduce myself, so I'll see you out there, man. I appreciate it.
No doubt. Good luck to your squad. We'll see you in camp.
Yes, sir.
Thanks. I just remember you mentioned Bowie State. I know they lost their head coach to Morgan State just this past offseason. So that, I wonder how that'll affect them, but I guess we'll see there. We have one last guest, kind of respect your time, who's already up here. Herbert L. Seward III. We'd love to hear from you.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, I'm a contributor for Saturday Blitz on the fan side of the platform, as well as HBCU Digital Network. HBCU athletics, basketball, football for the SWAC, MEAC, and pretty much all our other conferences. Just want to give a big shout out to Steve, man. Steve's a real pioneer in our space. A lot of us that are on here, Doc Holliday, BJ Jones, and a number of folks that are, on the space now. Steve has really kind of laid the groundwork for a lot of us that are contributors and content creators. Steve, I did one question for you, man, and this is an actual prediction for this coming weekend for Alabama State and Howard University. How do you see the game going?
Hey, Herb, first off, thanks for the kind words, man. I really appreciate it. I appreciate all the work that you do and the passion behind it and everything like that. But, man, you set me up. Y'all give me the ask. You get me out here. I'm going to go to the game. I'm going to be in these players' faces, and it's going to get back to somebody. But, it is what it is. It's all good. I'm not unlike my guy, Stephen A., my fellow Ram. You know what I mean? I actually am in their faces and everything like that. But nah, it's all love. It's all good. I think both coaches have their challenges. I think Alabama State, they have to contend with the Howard program that, has started to really get some gel and have some fire under head coach Larry Scott that I think they have wanted to see in that program for a while. They've been together for a while. They have a dangerous quarterback. I'm not the biggest X and O's guy, but I know that guy can play. And that program, the kids in that program, have been through a lot. I talked to them at Media Day. They still have a lot of those guys who are on that 2019 team that I talked about, which unfortunately for them turned into a dumpster fire of a season. But they've gone through and they persevered through that. And I think they're really hardened and toughened. I like to give Howard a hard time because, just because I like to give Howard a hard time. But no, their program is really on its way up. And then Alabama State, you got new head coach Eddie Robinson, who's never coached a game before, which can be a gift and a curse because, we don't necessarily know how he's going to call the game. We all obviously know as coordinators, and you can kind of see what they've done at other places. They got a new quarterback, Demetrius Davis, who formerly was at Auburn. And so I think it's a lot of energy on both sides. I think these are two programs that are hungry for wins. Last year you had Alcorn State, who, they had been the SWAC champions for the previous 2 years. And not to say that they weren't hungry, but you know what I mean? It was a little bit different, but I think you got two programs that are hungry for success, that feel like they're probably not that far away from being competitive, and they want to make a statement on a national stage. And MEAC has had this one. I'm going to give the slight edge to Howard just because, they've had a little bit more continuity, and I like the quarterback Quentin Williams, but I think it's going to hopefully we're in for a great game, and Nail Biter and myself and the guys that'll be down there, my guy Big Kobe, as well as Simone Stanley, we're really excited about everything that's going to be going on this weekend in Atlanta. And hopefully we'll get the honeybees and the stingettes. And ooh la la.
Yeah, as an Alabama State product, man, you'll definitely see the honeybees and the mighty marching hornets. There's one thing I just wanted to add on to the Howard discussion in terms of their program. Being a DMV guy that follows prep football in the area, the one thing that a lot of people put at Howard is being able to tap into that talent pipeline that's there in terms of football, particularly at the prep level. And I think Howard has a real difficulty in doing so because of the admissions and the grades requirements that kids have going to school there. That may be changing soon. Not necessarily admission standards, but a focus in the area to really kind of, get in on the ground level for, that talent that's in the area. So it's going to be interesting to see what Scott and his staff does. There are some people on that staff that recruit the area really well. So, we're looking forward to seeing what happens with that. But as far as the game goes, yeah, as an Alabama State guy, it's hard for me to pull against my Hornets, so I'm not. So it's going to be Alabama State.
Well, thanks so much for contributions. This has been a great, and I just wanted to add, in addition to all the great writers that have been in the audience, like BJ Jones, I also wanted to add Chris Ferguson. I saw you in the audience too. I wanted to give you a shout out. I enjoy your writings on D2 a lot as well.
Winston-Salem State Ram. I'm sorry.
Okay. So, Stephen, thank you. This has been a great talk. And I wish we could go on longer, but I respect your time. I could actually feel you kind of like been on here for like an hour and a half. I have more
It's
questions
all good. And
also.
I mean, yeah, I mean, HBCUs, it has in its last decade, it has become, something that impacted me, 18 years ago when I entered Winston-Salem State. It impacts me to this day, who I am as a person and as a man. And it's become, my not only my life's work but my passion. So I could talk about this stuff all night. And toughest stretch for the year, like a lot of folks, for me, is like once basketball season is over, and that from April to August kind of drags on to me. So I'm just really excited to be back, catch some HBCU football. Looking forward to going to some places I've never been before. Like I said, I'm starting the season in Canton. May make my way down to Baton Rouge to see LSU Southern. You never know where you'll catch me. Last year I did end up at Bluefield State, one of the new HBCU programs. You may catch me in Itabena, Mississippi, where I went last year, which was a treat. And I like to pop up at the big games, but also, get some of those different atmospheres and vantage points. And those are the type of stories that we're looking to tell just as much as the bigger ones this year. So I'm really excited about it.
Absolutely. And I got to say, I enjoyed your Bluefield State article because that was an absolutely fascinating one. The demographic shift at an HBCU that's now like 90% Caucasian because it's in West Virginia. And, watching, you were there for homecoming. And it's a great article. I recommend it. I'll drop it in the for sure.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It was amazing. Coach Coaxum there. He has a great story. He's a guy. He went to Army. He ended up coaching, in that Super Bowl where the Denver Broncos stole it from my Carolina Panthers. We won't go into that. But he's a great guy starting up their program. And there was a twinkle in a lot of folks' eyes, who hadn't seen their school represented on the football field in so long. And they were just excited. So I'm excited to see the growth of that program as we go forward this year, and maybe make another trip up the mountain. We'll see.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you, Stephen. Thank you to all of you who've contributed. It was great to hear from you. I know it started with a lot of questions from me. I love asking questions. It's why I enjoy this. And gosh, it's such an interesting topic with so many areas to touch on. So if you haven't checked out Gameday, check it out, Twitter account, and the website especially. We can't recommend it enough. Thank all of you. We hopefully will be able to have Stephen. If you're ever up for it, we'd love to have you again. So this will be real fun later in the season.
Anytime. I'm looking forward to it. The grind is here.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much, everybody. We hope you have a great night and on the hang up and listen.